So, Jonathan Tweet. I've been doing tabletop role-playing game design professionally since 1987. I've done a lot of games that have brought more story and character focus to role-playing games, like Ars Magica, Over the Edge, Everway, and then I was the lead designer on 3rd edition D&D, which is a much more technical sort of game, less story-oriented and more sort of combat and adventure-oriented game. And so obviously that all works to inform my work on 13th Age, which is sort of half the D&D style adventure game and half a more story-oriented indie style game.
I started playing D&D in 1974 or so, and I'd always also been a war gamer and a miniatures gamer. And I met Jonathan through Alarums and Excursions, which is a fanzine that was basically where I got into professional gaming, because I think that a bunch of the friends and acquaintances who we met doing that fanzine all sort of, let's just use the word, grew up to either be writing books for companies or running the companies, and it just sort of turned into, it's kind of funny because I think that was the pre-internet community of how our particular crop became game designers. So most of us weren't involved with Dungeons and Dragons. At that time, we were sort of the non-TSR group, in a certain say, the more indie group. And then, years later, after Jonathan had been working at Wizards for several years, I had been working for other companies like Daedalus and Chaosium, and I got hired working on Forgotten Realms at Wizards. So I worked on it for a little while, the 3rd edition, and then started doing lots of other different card games and miniatures games and things like that for Wizards. And eventually, I was in Jonathan's 3rd edition playtest campaign from the very start, which is the one I was telling you about earlier, Eric, where Daddy rolled a 1. Yeah. You don't even think you were in the room. I think you were like sending your daughter to do your bidding. And I eventually I led 4th edition design, and I did really enjoy the process. I kind of think that when people these days ask me how I feel about 4th edition, I say, I'd like to point you towards 13th Age. Because, I don't know if I could have timed that whistle better. So, Wade, is that you?
That is not me. I am muted.
Oh, okay. Somebody's got a trade whistle.
I think it's me. I'll mute myself for a second.
It's okay. I like it. It's pretty funny. So, in the case of 13th Age, as Jonathan said, it's a game where we are sort of marrying a bit of the crunchy fun that D20 rolling games are really good at providing, along with a half-designed world that players and game masters are really supposed to put their own spin on. And I think it's been really fun and really liberating to phrase this design as, how can we encourage people to come up with stuff that's really cool? And still, you got to add something that people wouldn't have thought of themselves, perhaps. But then just leave the rest of it as like, hey man, this is going to be your cool stuff, not ours. Jonathan?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I've always tried to build role-playing games that encourage people to be creative and take matters into their own hands, and I think 13th Age really brings that home to the D20 rolling audience.
I usually don't talk much about 4th edition, but Eric, there's one more funny thing I wanted to say that became really clear to me recently. One of the things I really wanted to do with 4th edition is I really wanted to change the style the game was written in, away from the D&D sort of faux medievalish. Totally failed. Completely didn't do it. And one of the things that I've been really happy about is now that, oh, Jonathan, you missed this. Cal just sent a message saying that the layout is done, except for a couple table of content numbers. And now that it's actually done, I can truthfully say we did not fall back on full medieval style. We kept the English is modern English and conversational and fun. So pretty happy about that.
Yeah, I'd say we really like third edition for its great D&D feel and the freedom you have to create all sorts of characters, and we really like fourth edition for how easy it plays and how easy it is to DM, and sort of how exciting it is, and so 13th Age I think is the best of both worlds.
Yeah, I've heard it described as kind of a, the natural meeting between those two editions. But it seems like more than that also. So what other games kind of influenced your design decisions?
So I've given a lot of thought to where sort of these story games come from, and I think in the early 80s or mid 80s, I think they came from games that were based on movies. Like there was the James Bond role-playing game and the Ghostbusters role-playing game, and it's a bit of a stretch, but in the Ghostbusters role-playing game that the Chaosium folks did for West End Games, you had characters whose skills were sort of invented freeform. You had a dice pool mechanic that was very simple for rolling whether you hit or not, whether you succeeded or not, or what have you. But in how you described your character, you could give them any sort of specialty that you could dream up rather than pulling them off of a list. And that sort of freedom to create a character, I think it's natural that started from movies where people were trying to emulate, not simulate a war game, but emulate a story. And then, I pulled that into a lot of my work on earlier role-playing games, but some of that free-form stuff goes all the way back to the mid-'80s work.
On the track of talking about games influenced by movies, certainly Feng Shui by Robin Laws was a pretty big influence on me. Just partly for style and partly for mechanics like mooks. Things that sort of say, and Feng Shui. Okay, what I'm about to say isn't true because if I wanted to say, oh, Feng Shui was a game which really told you from the very start, no, everything your character is supposed to do is going to be cool and powerful, and that's good. Superhero games were also supposed to be like that. The weird part about it is that at that time, I could make an argument that most of the superhero games that were on the market had this weird thing where they were sort of, their own mechanics got in the way a little bit, so that people were dealing as much with the mechanics as with the I'm doing something really cool, and therefore Feng Shui did a better job.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, the superhero games were like high-powered combat simulations.
Certainly Champions was. Yeah. You could make obviously Marvel superheroes is a different camp, and Village of Vigilantes and others, but they never. It didn't feel cool in the way that Feng Shui really encouraged you to be.
That's right.
Yep.
And then all the indie games, like we're both talking about relatively old games, but we've learned a lot from the indie games that have come out. Starting with games like Sorcerer, and then Dogs in the Vineyard, Burning Wheel, like the sort of fresh approach to narration and what it means to fail.
I've played a lot fewer indie games than Jonathan has. I've read a whole bunch of them. I've played them less often, and that's just basically my fault. But it certainly hasn't escaped me that the times that I have played the indie games, and for instance, I played Dogs in the Vineyard when Carl Rigney ran it with friends from college, Jeff and Nada. Nada had never played a role-playing game before, really, and it was one of the most memorable experiences of my role-playing life, especially when I'm ending up with, my old college friend, and she has a gun pointed at my head in the first 10 minutes or so, and really, really means it. And I think that the part about indie games that these games really hit with is that the traditional role-playing style, I'll say this, is world building. Lots. I'm going to use a big brush, and I don't want to make this sound too dismissive. Some of the roots of a lot of role-playing game creation are from people who are writers and storytellers, or really, really want to be novelists and storytellers, but aren't doing that. But the part that, let's imagine that writing a novel is really, really hard, and really the people, it's hard to do. But being a story builder and creating an actually really interesting world that has a lot of depth to it and excitement, since the days of Tolkien, creators have been really on board with that. And the whole shared world writing experience. So what you find if you look at the traditional role-playing market is that you could probably take a certain number of role-playing games and say, actually, these guys were a lot more excited about their world building than they were about their game. And if you find the people who love that particular world, what you'll find is they love the world. They get into it, people think in it, and almost the solitaire gaming that occurs in that game system is people thinking about the world. They're not actually playing the game, because honestly, if you start playing the game, Jonathan and I have had this several times, when we start playing a game, it's unplayable. Unfrickin' playable. And I'm looking at you, Mr. Tweet, because he still forces it down your craw for 2 or 3 sessions. But the weird part about it is that we still like thinking about it. It's still like, oh my god, this could be great, and if only it had this particular system tweak on it. And that's a lot of what role-playing gamers do. I mean, we sit there and go, well, I really love the concepts here, I want to make this world work, we're going to figure out how to do it. These indie games basically came out and said, let's take that world building and story building and storytelling piece of creation and let the players do it also, and let the game master do it in conjunction with them, instead of let's give you a source book that details every single thing about this particular city-state and all the other nations around it. It's like games have always, our traditional games, D20 and D&D, have always said, hey, it's your world, you can do whatever you want. And then simultaneously handed you this giant info dump.
Right. That's right.
Saying,
Yeah.
Which, boy, I was gonna, hey man, am I live? Is that my 5? It's a little bit like, which, to use a larger crazy analogy, and this is a crazy analogy stolen from Jonathan Tweet, Mr. I'm going to talk about religion and gaming, but an awful lot of religion is oftentimes like that also. Hey, it's all about free and independent thought. You've got to come to your own thing. But don't forget to take this very book very seriously, and it's like, that is kind of not the approach we wanted to take. We wanted to get much more in the indie style of giving, and that's why the icons are important in 13th Age. It's like, I think the icons were originally Jonathan's really, really good idea, and the fact that there's usually an emperor and there's usually a dwarf king and there's usually some really giant evil dragon. Well, we made those fixtures of our world that players can kind of put their own spin on, and game masters can too. And so, I'm really trying to create 13th Age with the idea that every single campaign a dungeon master runs is different than the previous one.
That's right.
The players will add new things, and so will the GM. So.
Yep. I want to add one thing about our inspiration, and we haven't talked about it much, but Rob and I both spent a long time working on miniatures games at Wizards, and miniatures games don't have a lot to do with story games, but they did give us a lot of practice of making combat fast and exciting. And you see that in 13th Age.
I know that's kind of one of the I guess criticisms and praises for 4th edition was that combat was fun, but could take quite a long time to actually run. So you guys have added the escalation die and some other things to make combat speed along, as well as kind of getting rid of the grid and everything like that. So how did you come up with that stuff?
I started using the escalation die when I was running 4th edition. The end of 4th edition, I got really freaking tired of the game. Okay. I think we had a concept of how the math was going to work out. I'm reasonably certain the math didn't work out that way. I mean, flat out did not. And
well, monsters had too many hit points.
Yeah, that's right. And I don't want to go into how that happened, but it definitely happened. So without just doing a lump thing like let's cut off X% of monsters' hit points, I was, when I was running 4th edition, and I think I should say this is actually after I was laid off from Wizards. So, but I was still running my my Fey Team campaign, and I started looking for ways to be like, man, I want to push this along. So what am I going to do? And it just came to me that I like the idea of escalating tension. I'm just going to go ahead and add +1 every time. And so that was about a month before we really seriously started working on 13th Age. And so it's like, okay, that worked. So I think the funny thing is I'm pretty sure my D&D group does not remember it happening. And I'm going to say something terrible. They don't remember it happening because the combat rounds lasted so long that the die didn't go out. Essentially. So they don't remember because the rounds lasted too long. Oh well. Sigh. It was only a one-time experiment. So that the escalation die was it's the kind of thing that sometimes a game that was going to be a perfect simulation or is sort of
That's right.
It's less comfortable with this, but we're doing 13th Age to be a dramatic experience that is a little bit more abstract in some ways. We're not trying to be as you say, there's no grid. We're not trying to be finicky about, I'm sorry, sir, you're 1 square short of that desired move. Your whole turn falls apart. We're not on that wavelength, and therefore an escalation die just felt completely natural and wonderful the entire time through.
So there was an old board game called Titan, which is notorious for taking forever to play, but they did have a mechanic in combat, which was something like if the attacker cannot defeat the defender within, I think it was 6 rounds of combat, then the defender wins. And so
yeah,
it put sort of a timer on it, like a time pressure. And sort of that's what the escalation die does. I like mechanics that sort of put the balance over time in favor of one side over the other, so that you know that the battle is going to come to a conclusion. And that's one thing that the escalation die does. If the characters can hang on sufficiently, then ideally they'll be able to overcome their opponents. Though of course we still have some really tight battles where that +6 bonus on your attack rolls isn't good enough if you're the only character left standing against a horde of enemies.
Jonathan, did you come between? Weren't you like 1 or 2 hit points away from a total party kill when you were
1 hit point?
Running? That's
what I'm thinking about. 1 hit point away. Yeah.
Okay.
So then, what was the catalyst for actually coming up with 13th Age? When did you guys sort of come together on that and make it a reality?
I think it was pretty much me doing the pushing, from what I remember. Okay.
Well, I don't remember exactly when it was, but we did sort of get together and say, hey, neither of us has a corporate job right now. We can do whatever we want. What is the very best thing that Rob Heinsoo and Jonathan Tweet could possibly do together? And that's how we came up with 13th Age.
I had been thinking that I was gonna do some role-playing design, and I kind of wanted to. And I had talked with Simon because Simon had a line of 4th edition products he was going to do that Robin was involved with, and I had talked about doing it. And I just found myself saying, you know what, I don't want to write 4th edition stuff. I don't want to do that more. And so I started. So at that point, I was like, it basically hit me. Why don't I do something with Jonathan? And I don't remember which job status you were at that point, but we were both pretty happy about the idea. It wasn't called 13th Age for quite a while.
Yeah, that's right.
I've looked at our earliest drafts, recently,
Yep.
and it's very funny to see the things that just completely survived, and like, oh look, well, we had that from the very beginning.
Yep.
And then other things to be like, oh my goodness. There was a learning curve there. So yeah, the Escalation Die was in it from the very start. Some form of gridless thing was in it from the very start.
And I had already been messing around a little bit on my own for fun with some D20 inspired designs. I did something that was based in TechML that Rob was in, and that was very free form. And I had something that I ran at a couple of conventions. It never got very fleshed out, but it had features like your armor class is basically based on your class, and you can you can describe your armor, but your armor class value is a class feature rather than being an emergent property of what things you buy off a list. So you can create your character without going shopping and buying gear first. I've been playing in that area. I think I was ready to hit the ground running when Rob and I started working together.
And I guess the perspective on this is that Jonathan and I have been in the same gaming group for many years now. He's been on a bit of a hiatus just recently, but at that stage, we were still playing every week together. So we kind of had this situation of like, well, I don't really want to run 4th edition right now.
Right.
You don't really want to run 3.5, or Pathfinder, and so you were running indie games, and I was going, well, what am I going to run? And that's when we're sort of like, let's design the game we want to run on Wednesday nights.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
and
we've been in that.
Go ahead.
We've been in that gaming group since 1999.
Yeah.
So, did you ever consider, going the non-D20 route, or was that pretty much, you wanted to do a D20 game, and kind of, fit that into the broader D20 ecosystem?
Well, there was a time when I didn't like the sort of the D20 system, that Dungeons and Dragons was based on, and I worked on lots of other game designs that were very different from that, and then of course I got hired. I was at Wizards and I got assigned to work on Dungeons and Dragons, and I think I fixed it. I think the team that worked on that fixed it, and the system, owed a lot to my experience with previous games that I had done, and so now I think the basics of the game had gotten to the point where it's actually pretty good, and we could use some other system. It didn't seem called for.
Yeah, that's probably right. I mean, I think that both you and I played a lot of games like RingQuest earlier, and then obviously some other games you designed. But I think that to answer your question directly, in terms of this particular design, no, there wasn't a moment that Jonathan and I thought, hey, we should do something other than D20 rolling for 13th Age. We were pretty clear we wanted to do that, and one absolutely clear reason is that that's what our gaming group tends to enjoy. So, I mean, I was like, hey guys, now we're rolling 3d6. What? No, not necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to
No.
do something better, I'm sorry, if you're going to do something different, it has to be a lot better. And, honestly, I think the D20 rolling system is close enough that it's hard to imagine something that's a lot better for the kind of game we want to play.
I guess that, I mean, my attitude is always that there's always room for different new game designs that are really, really interesting. And so the fact that we designed 13th Age as a D20 game, I mean, I could imagine, doing another game design someday that doesn't do D20, and this really, but it would have to have specific reasons. And if we're sitting here like doing essentially a combination of an indie game and crunchy dungeon crawling, D20 is the obvious choice. It's the right. I think it's the right choice.
Personally, it was also an opportunity to revisit that territory when Rob and I were beholden to nobody but each other. I mean, I love the work I did on 3rd edition, and the 3rd edition campaign that I ran was one of the best, if not the best, in my life. But it's not the game that's ideally suited to me. It's not the game that I would do, for my, to express my own opinion or my own game design philosophy. And 13th Age is much more that.
Yeah. Yep. I think even when I was like working on 4th edition and Jonathan had very interesting comments, the truth is, it's not like I was able to like go ahead and use them or implement them, which was frustrating, And so being able to work on 13th Age together, really fun, really good.
Well, right, and a big corporation wants a particular kind of game, and
Yep.
I gave that to them. Rob gave that to them. That's fine, but there's another kind of game out there, and that's sort of more closer to our heart, and that's 13th Age.
An example of that, I think, is, for instance, just obviously, we're sitting here designing some things that are going to come after the 13th Age core book, but it's never been my intention to go ahead and publish endless numbers of spells for each of the classes, or powers for each of the classes. 4th edition, and to some extent, to a lesser extent, 3rd edition, but still it happened, had source book after source book that were like, hey, if you're playing a wizard, you really do need to read all this stuff and figure out which of these spells is there. And an awful lot of them are garbage, but then the 1 or 2 that are broken, you're going to want to use those. Well, that's not the kind of game 13th Age is. There's going to be some new spells for wizards and clerics, but it's going to be summoning spells because those got left out of the book completely. And there's an element of, I don't want this new game to collapse under the weight of stuff that people have to own to feel like they're playing it right. It's because the point is people should be making up they should be making up stuff that's fun for them in a role-playing sense, not having to sort of like churn through a product line of new toys. And so that's the philosophy difference. Whereas, no way could you do that at Wizards. The whole point was you were supposed to be creating a game that had room for endless product embellishment in those ways. I don't know, maybe more so when I did 4th edition than when you did 3rd edition. I would suspect. Yeah, different dynamic there.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, reading the book. It is sort of conversational, I think, and there's a lot of times where you'll talk about how you each approach a different situation. So I guess I wondered kind of what is the process of designing the game with just the two of you, and maybe you don't always agree. I mean, it seems like you've taken the approach that if there is a disagreement, you're just going to say the player can choose. Here's how we do it, but go ahead and do it your own way, or follow one of the other examples.
Yeah, if you read role-playing products from like the really early days, they often have a very conversational tone. They're sort of written like like game master notes. Like it's a guide to how to play. It's not a set of rules. It's like, here's some rules of thumb, and here's some experiences we had, and this is what we would advise. Wouldn't it be cool if you tried that? And it's really sort of gamer to gamer, transmission of ideas. And so we wanted to keep that up, and that the idea that Rob can have his say and I can have my say, that helps people see that, you know, that nothing is set in stone. There's more than one way to be right, and you know, we're gamers and we've got our opinions, and you're a gamer and you've got your opinions, so go play your way. And the other thing is, it kept us from having to come to agreement every time we disagreed.
I mean, I think you could see that most of the book we do agree. I mean, it's like when one of us had a good idea. I think that our working relationship is, I love it because when one of us has a really good idea, we tend to be able to convince the other one. There's very few times that I actually am really convinced I was, quote, right, and, you know, and somehow Jonathan didn't get it. You know, it's like in those places where we're disagreeing, I totally get why he does it his way, and I'm amused because honestly, by the time the game's done, it's entirely possible that we're playing the other guy's way. That's what tends to sort of often happen in those disagreements. In terms of the actual processes of getting the work done, different chapters, different, like, one or the other of us wrote most of it, or a lot of it, and then the other person came in and filled things in and wrote more. Yep. Like you wrote most of the original icons chapter.
Yep.
And then I wrote a couple of icons that we added, you know, into it. I wrote most of the geography.
Yep.
But you wrote big pieces of it. You know, that you where you just are like, hey, this is cool, do this. And Keith Baker added a couple pieces to the geography of a couple cool things. Because he's been involved in some original concepting with us. I did most of the classes chapter.
Yeah, that's great.
And that's partially because I ended up with more time on the project, and I like digging into that kind of specific crunchy mechanical stuff.
That's right.
Whereas Jonathan likes making really insightful comments that help it work out. You know, we're saying, no, how about this? And then I go ahead and like handle that momentary execution. But you did pretty much, I mean, I think the treasure chapter, right?
Yep. Ironically, considering how little treasure I hand out in my campaigns. But I think that Rob was starting to touch on something, that there's sort of a division of labor. I naturally tend to sort of the more abstract systematizing. So, you know, almost sort of these top-level things of, you know, how are the icons going to work, and what you know, what does that mean for the world, and what have you. And then Rob does much of the more specific stuff. And I think that lets us work together, but not always on exactly the same thing, and makes for a really good
yeah, and then as an example of that, I mean, I think you did most of the icon relationships rules, and then eventually, in a period, I think when I was running the game a lot more than you, I eventually wrote like the final advice on how to go in and use them in it, you know, and so all that stuff ended up, and that sort of leapfrogging approach is completely, I think, what happened. Monster chapter.
Yep.
You did a bunch, then I did a bunch, you know, like that, and then you did a little, something.
That's right.
A leapfrogging approach.
Right, and then the whole big chart of how many hit points does a monster have at what level and how does that work, right? That sort of very abstract stuff I did first, and then the much more specific stuff, like what cool thing every monster does, that's mostly you.
Yep.
Another part of the process will be, I come up with an idea, Rob says mean cutting things to me about how bad the idea is, and then within a week, we sort of settle on my idea.
You know, I just want the viewing internet audience to know that Jonathan waited until he thought he was safe in front of you all to bring that stuff out. We'll talk about this later, Mr. Tweet.
I'm sure we will. It goes a little bit both ways. For me, I like Rob's ideas most. Once I've forgotten that he came up with them, and I pick them up as if they're my own.
Thanks to you, it works for both of us.
Yeah. Happy to do the heavy lifting there in the relationship front.
Oh dear. So our gaming group. Oh, I'm not even going to say that. No. Erased. Oh dear. We sometimes get into like these massive arguments while we're running a game, and the rest of the gaming group will just push their chairs back to the table.
It is bickering at its finest.
Yes, but I think that learning to control it and move progressively, it's gotten better.
Right. I mean, the thing is, yeah, it is worth pushing through all of that. Right. Like both of us care very much about this product because this is something that we're doing out of love. This isn't something we're doing for a corporation. And so it's very important to each of us that we're happy with how it turns out. And so that we take it very personally, how you do weapon damage, for example.
Yep. I think that there's a couple aspects of the project that Jonathan has actually saved, put aside, so that when he gets the final book, he can open it like a Christmas present and be happily surprised.
Yeah, that's right.
The art. It's like this is something where I'm kind of like I've really worked with the artists Lee Moyer and Aaron, and and so when they contribute things that then have to be brought into the game, it's like I'll handle that. But I totally love the fact that in the long, Jonathan does not know what the book looks like right this second.
That's right.
And you're going to be happily surprised. So good.
I want to return to something that we touched on earlier. If you ask what is our creative process. So step one of the creative process is to know each other as friends and fellow gamers for years, and then step two is game together regularly for several more years, and then we're in a position to have the conversations of how you deal weapon damage or whatever. But like there's no other person on the planet that I could have made this game with because there's nobody else that I've had this same experience with.
Cool. So what about the other stuff beyond 13th Age, the 13 Ways, the Kickstarter? Tell me a bit about that.
13 True Ways Kickstarter I think it was a kind of crazy project in the sense that we started it at a time when I thought we would have 13th Age done really soon, and then we turned out not to. So, honestly, hey everybody, doing a Kickstarter or a supplement for a game that isn't out is not the brightest idea, okay? It
worked. It worked.
Yeah, it worked. It did work. On the same time, it was dumb.
Yeah. All right. That's fair.
Dumb.
So here's what. Yeah.
13th Age, as we mentioned earlier in this conversation, it just finished layout. So okay. So the layout burnt down once, but
right.
Every game. And it's going to be really wonderful to focus full attention on 13 True Ways. I think that Jonathan and I'm absolutely positive it's going to be late compared to what anybody would ever want. Simultaneously, the idea of really, Jonathan, this is sort of I'm about to talk about your thing, so maybe I should let you. The whole old school way we're doing 13 True Ways.
Oh yeah,
You should
I'd be
take
happy
that.
to jump in and take that.
Yeah, you should take that.
Yeah. So I mentioned before the way people used to write role-playing products as sort of conversational, and if you look at something like, the first supplement for D&D, whether that's Greyhawk or Blackmore, depending on who you believe, And or the Arduin Grimoire series by David Hargrave. Like they just took all their best, coolest ideas and put them under one cover. You know, today everything's done professionally. You've got like a whole line of support products is sort of sketched out in advance. So you have like, here's the book about barbarians and fighters and monks or whatever. And it's got to have everything for those classes, and it can't have anything for any other classes. And, you know, it's good, but it isn't the coolest stuff you can think of to put between two covers. So for 13 True Ways, it's, you know, it's a grab bag of whatever we think is cool. We're never going to define every class and every race and every city and every monster the way, you know, a corporate game line might. We're going to do support material that's cool, one grab bag of cool stuff at a time. So 13 True Ways, that even the title is sort of a play, you know, poking fun at the idea that there's one true way to play, and no, you know, there's at least 13.
So we did a Monster Art Plus 13 contest during the Kickstarter. We said, hey, if we get a stretch goal of a certain amount, we'll let people write essays, and then we'll do monster art for that. And we ended up with the stretch goal to get 13 of those. I think that I've been sort of unveiling the art that comes in, and I got the first draft a couple days ago of one. Here's an example of like when I say trying to do the coolest thing. Somebody said, hey man, we need to see what goblins look like in the world of 13th Age. You know, for instance, Pathfinder has these amazingly really cool goblins that are really their own, that say, that's Pathfinder because that's a Pathfinder goblin. I mean, that's a really cool thing. And they were sort of wanting us to do the same thing, of like, you know, make your brand stance. Which I kind of didn't do. But because instead what I did is like, hey, I'll tell you what my brand stance is. There's a flying realm that's populated by goblins, and they're attacking this castle with siege ladders and flying wings and boiling oil and lemmings like goblins coming down. It can be a 2-page spread. Do it. And because we've got Aaron McConnell as the basic core artist who can basically just do anything, and the thing is, that's a part of this we haven't talked about yet. Too loud?
No, so okay. I just need to talk to someone real quick. You keep going, Rob.
Okay, so because we have Lee and Aaron as artists, I've been able to go ahead and give art instructions and ask for things that would just be insanity to ask, I would call it normal artists to do. Because normal artists, like we're all doing this as a labor of love. And when I make some ridiculous thing like that, at the end of the art suggestion says, look, I know this is probably too much. You are allowed to go ahead and tell me, Rob, this is crazy, please don't ask me to do this. And the mistake that Aaron McConnell keeps making is he keeps, instead of saying, Rob, you're crazy, he keeps saying, yeah, that sounds like a challenge. You know? And as long as he keeps saying, yeah, that sounds like a challenge, man, I'm going to push. So I think the attitude towards the design for the book is going to be similar. You know, there's a couple classes we're doing that are going to be completely, at the moment, they look like they're going to be completely unlike the classes that are in the core book. Hooray. You know, and I guess I haven't said that in public before, but now I did, you know, but I'm not even going to say which ones they are. But it's sort of like, it isn't going to be just the same old, you know, it's going to be something like, oh, I didn't see that coming. So that is definitely the ideal. You know, I know there's a couple things that in the Kickstarter process that I said, hey, we're going to do this, and I'm now thinking, oh, that was a terrible idea. Like, I don't want to do stats for the actual icons. I don't. It's a bad idea to do that this soon in the game's life. It's a bad idea. I don't know why that came out of my mouth ever. But I'm going to do something that's going to be cooler than that, or that's cool, that will try to fill that niche, you know, and so that people won't be like, oh, you didn't do it, well, I did this instead, and that'll be cool. 13 True Ways, time out.
Yeah, so the room I'm
gotta
in,
go?
someone's going to need, so I'm
Yep.
going to walk around a little bit and find another room. I'm going to put my camera on blank while I'm doing that.
Okay.
But I still have a little time to talk. I just have to find another room.
Okay, good.
There we go. One thing I wanted to interject about the timing of the Kickstarter, which Rob described as dumb. The reason we did this dumb thing
No, I was the one.
is because there was this. One of the big things about 13 True Ways is that we wanted to be able to keep that core design team together of Rob, Jonathan, Lee, and Aaron to work on this. And because they're all busy freelancers, we wanted to move quickly to ensure that they would be able to, we would be able to retain their services for that. And so it's like, well, we have to raise this money now because otherwise the team is going to scatter to the four winds, get involved in other projects, and it's going to be a lot harder to put them together again a year from now.
Yeah.
And so that's why we moved as fast as we did. It did mean that we had to work a lot harder on the campaign for this sequel, this expansion to a game that doesn't exist yet. But that was the reasoning behind that.
Yeah, you're right. And I think I should say, when I say the word dumb, I'm really pointing every finger at myself, because there were several things that happened there, and one of them is, as Wayne said, to keep the team together, we kind of needed to do this, so I'm glad we did, and it worked. As Jonathan said, it worked. Oh my God. The aspect of what I didn't count on also was that I wasn't as involved enough. Okay, when you're doing a Kickstarter, it's a really big deal if you're the creator to be really involved in it. I wasn't involved in the Kickstarter right at the start because I was trying to finish the core book by a particular deadline. And so what ended up happening is that right at the start of the Kickstarter, I wasn't there enough. And afterwards, or as soon as I started realizing, oh, that is not how to do a Kickstarter. You've got to be involved. And so the timing on my part was also, a little bit sketchy. So Wade, thank you for working so incredibly hard when you shouldn't have had to. And the dumb finger, I want to be pointing at myself. It turns out that every time you do a Kickstarter, you learn an awful lot about mistakes you can make. I think that the mistakes that I personally made on this one aren't mistakes that I've seen other people make. So,
Well, you're a visionary, Rob. You're very
thanks
original.
a lot. Awesome. Good times.
Also, don't launch the Kickstarter, whatever your Kickstarter is, on the first day of Gen Con. That's a poor idea.
That was not a good idea.
Anyway, I'll shut up now.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. I've forgotten that one. Sweet Lord. So there's other Pelgrane products. They're doing a bestiary, and I think it's probably going to be called the 13th Age Bestiary. Ken Hite is the main organizer. A lot of different writers working on it. I'm helping by developing, which is totally fun because it means I get to come in and suggest fun mechanics for monsters and sort of push stories a little bit more towards the freewheeling invention model of the half-made world rather than saying, no, this is exactly what it's always like. And I think that that book is going to turn out amazing. I'm really happy with the way that a lot of the writers have found wonderful, quirky things that I've never thought about with a monster to add to the sort of the mythos of what these monsters are. And I think that that's really going to help that book feel right in 13th Age. And so I'm pretty excited about that. I put I think there's going to be various adventures from Pelgrane, but none of those are really anywhere near the finishing line, and so I'll wait and not talk. I shouldn't talk about those because I don't have all the details. I'll be writing one of them, and I've got a bunch done on it, but I'm working on 13 True Ways as more priority first. There will be other stuff from Pelgrane, but they're figuring that out right now. So that's I actually have email with a whole bunch of suggestions that I have not had time to look at today. So later on.
Cool. Well, that's pretty much all I had. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about 13th Age, or things you may have wanted to chime in about?
I'm looking towards Jonathan first, since I've been on a rant and ramble mode today. Jonathan, you got anything else today?
I guess I want to say it's really terrifically exciting to be able to bring this game to reality. Before I worked on Dungeons and Dragons, I was exploring more story-oriented games, how to get your character to be more like a character in a fiction book or in a movie. How to make things move faster and be more about the story and less about the combat and what have you. And then when I got to work on Dungeons and Dragons and be the lead designer of 3rd edition, I totally had to switch gears and be crunchy and mechanical and spell everything out and what have you. And that was fun. I had a great time. I'm proud of my work there. But we didn't move Dungeons and Dragons in the direction that role-playing games had been going. I mean, if anything, 2nd edition was sort of more free-formy and story-oriented than 3rd edition was. And I think that was the right decision for the corporation, and 3rd edition was a tremendous success, so it's hard to argue with that. But I was always curious about what would have happened if D&D had been taken in a more story-oriented direction. Like, if you go back to the late 80s, early 90s, there were all these games where, you were a member of you were a wizard in a house, a lineage, or you were a vampire in a clan, or you were a werewolf in a gang, or you were a space traveler in a noble house, or there was this sense that your character should be connected to the world in some real way, and in 3rd edition your character really still is a wandering mercenary with no mechanical built-in connection to the world. It's been very satisfying to go back to like pre-3rd edition, before the grid, before everything was nailed down, and sort of branch off on a different evolutionary exploration and take the D20 style of play that people love and, in some ways, update it to the 90s. That sounds kind of mean, but like that is where story games sort of started to diverge from D&D, and D&D never went down that path until now. And it's not just the 90s, because we're pulling in stuff from all these indie games that sort of make the 90s games look pretty pedestrian. And so it's very fulfilling for me to take this style of game that everybody loves and bring it together with everything we've learned about how to make great role-playing games. Everything we've learned in the last 20 or 30 years.
That's great. I've totally enjoyed being able to design a game with my best friend. I think that being able to do something that is the game we're going to want to play for a long time is great, and I'm really happy that we were able to go, we've gone the OGL route as much as possible.
Yeah.
So that if there is a chance that some of these mechanics make sense for other people to like push into different styles of gaming experience or more like this, they can. And I really felt that the OGL in 3rd edition was a great thing to do, and that the experience of game designers adding to the art and help and the art improving with new ideas. I'm really glad that we went that route as well. So I think that the next few years will be pretty interesting in gaming, and I'm very obviously we're both excited to just have something that we can be proud of and stand behind, and when a 10-year-old kid tells me that they've always wanted to play and they want to get into it, I can give 13th Age to them and their dad, and same for my grizzled peers on my soccer team. So, yeah, it's pretty good.
Cool. Well, thanks. I really appreciate you guys taking the time.